Thank you so much, everyone. I'm very happy to be here, and I have prepared some slides on the PowerPoint to guide us in our discussion tonight. But I will also stop sharing my screen so that you can see my face and maybe not see all of the other, slides. So tonight our topic is multimodality in language education. And again, it's my honor to be able to share some of my own learning with all of you. So I want to begin by giving us an overview for tonight. We'll start with my personal introduction, just so I can share a little bit of my background with all of you. Then I think it is important for students to always consider what are the things that we already know about this topic? How can we build on the understandings and from our prior learning and our prior understandings? We'll look at the ways that language has always and ever been multimodal. And we'll talk about two main concepts that guide us in our discovery of this topic. The notion of semiotics, which is just a fancy way of saying like signs and symbols, and also notions of visual literacy. So if you look off to the side, you can see that I have chosen some print-based multimodal texts. So the first in the white image is a D, and my last name is Deroo. My family name is Deroo, and it comes from Dutch. It's from the Netherlands. But you can see this D has some flowers and a bird, like a duck. It has ABC, and then D comes after ABC for the ABC blocks. And so you can kind of see these images are an artful rendering of the fourth letter in the English alphabet. Then next to that, you can see a very famous drawing, from a historical perspective. And so one of our famous artists and scientists created this drawing. But you can see that there's not only drawing, but it's made to depict the man in movement. And so we have a visual text. We have the notion of gesture as he moves his arms and his legs. Even though the picture itself is static, there are multiple versions of the man to suggest movement. And then we have some writing below. So we have print, we have drawing, we have text. So this is another example of a multimodal composition. And then at the very bottom, we have what some might say are some of the original, very ancient texts in terms of the hieroglyphics from Egypt. And when we think about today, we use a similar feature all the time, emojis. So when we text and use emojis, it's very similar to some of the ancient pictographs that the Egyptians did in their hieroglyphics. So collectively, these three different examples are static. They don't move. They're not dynamic. And yet they are representations of many modes to suggest or represent meaning, right? And so for us, as we are users of language, we are often negotiating for meaning, trying to understand one another. Sometimes if we speak different languages, we can rely on other forms. Like if I speak, Chinese and you don't speak Chinese, we can point and gesture, we can draw. There are other ways to communicate using language beyond words. And so when we think about multimodality, this is an important part of our conversation this evening. So I want to give just a little bit of background, and I made my own multimodal slide. So you can see there's an icon in the upper right-hand corner. That's the bird from Twitter and from tweeting. You can see a picture of me and my family. And then in the bottom, in the dark black text, you can see two Chinese characters, two pictographs, which is Shuangyu, which means two languages or bilingual. So I identify as bilingual. I was born in the United States in California. I grew up from age 9 until I went to university in the state of Michigan, which is near the Great Lakes region. And then I spent 10 years after I graduated from university living in China. And even though I took French for 4 years in high school, I found that my language learning followed the audiolingual method. Maybe you've talked about this in your classes as one formal method of TESOL. It's a lot of behaviorist, cognitive. You memorize these sentences, but it's not like CLT. It's not like communicative language teaching, which many of you are studying now, right? It's less social and cultural and more memorization. So even though I studied French for 4 years, it wasn't until I came to live in China that I considered myself to be bilingual. Now, some of us are born into families where our parents speak additional languages. Our parents might be bilingual. Both of my parents are monolingual. Most of the United States is monolingual, although that's rapidly shifting because of demographic change. But all of these experiences have shaped who I am as a researcher and as a teacher and even as a father. Both of my daughters were born in China, and so they have a different cultural heritage. Even though they're American, their passports say that they were born in a foreign country to our family, right? I taught high school English literature and poetry and just English for 3 years in the United States. And then I spent over 10 years in China as an English language educator and English teacher trainer. And part of this is that because of my time overseas in China, because of my master's degree, which was in intercultural relations, I'm able to navigate across differences in language and differences in culture. So if you put me in a Chinese banquet, I can tell you which person in the room has the most honor or the most power. I can tell you when a toast should be expected, when a person should be able to give a toast back. And so for many of us who are working to become TESOL professionals or to be teachers to speakers of additional or other languages, we want to consider, the role of pragmatics, the role of register, the role of how do we have intercultural competence to navigate, because we know that language and culture go hand in hand, right? You cannot take away a person's cultural practices without looking at their linguistic practices. And because language and culture are so closely connected, it's really important that we understand the ways that language can inform culture. So I would, again, note that I speak Chinese and that I'm receptive in French. So I wouldn't self-identify as multilingual, but I would definitely say that I'm bilingual. So part of my work with students is this idea that students have a lot of lived experience, that students have resources, that students come from families and communities, that they have certain practices and behaviors that they bring with them into the classroom. So even think about maybe in your context, growing up in a predominantly a Muslim country that follows Islam. So your cultural traditions are a huge part of your lived experience. And so in my work in the United States, if I'm teaching a student that maybe comes from a Muslim background or from a Jewish background or from a Christian background, maybe I would think, oh, they engage with a holy text. Maybe they have the Bible or the Quran or the Torah, right? So all of this knowledge and experience they bring with them into the classroom. And we should think about how can we take what our students know and use that as a foundation for building on their understandings. So maybe for you, the term multimodality is something you've thought a lot about. Maybe for you, the term multimodality is something new. Maybe you've heard about social semiotics before, and maybe this is also a new idea. So as we engage in the conversation tonight, I want you to think about what do you already understand about this topic, and how can tonight's lecture help you to better understand how you can apply the theories of multimodality or social semiotics to your own teaching practice. And another way that we can think about this is how our own lives are multimodal. So with the COVID-19 global pandemic, many of us switched to online teaching and learning. Even now tonight, I join you from the United States. I didn't go to Indonesia to deliver this lecture in person. So we have the video camera that is mediating our understandings, right? We have the text box where you can put things in the chat feature. I'm sharing my screen. So collectively, we have audio, we have visual, we have text. So even Zoom itself is a multimodal means of communication. And I did this last night with the other group, but different modes have different affordances. So if we think about the mode, If I stop my video, you can now see a picture of me, but because I'm talking to you, you can still hear my voice, right? So different modes give us different benefits. So right now I can be gesturing, I can be using my hands to talk, but you cannot see that. So it's not a way to support you, but you can definitely hear my voice. And so you're still able to make sense of the things that I'm saying to you. Now, if I start my video again, right, I can talk about, maybe tonight we'll have 4 main ideas. First, introduction. Second, analysis of what we already know. Third, multimodality, social semiotics. And fourth, visual literacies. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I'm using fingers as a gesture to reinforce the 4 points that we'll talk about tonight. If I was to take away my audio, so what I just said was, if I take away the audio, you still have the visual, but maybe it takes away some of the meaning making because you can't hear me. You can only see what I'm gesturing. Maybe you can watch my mouth move, but losing the audio is a constraint. It takes away some of the meaning making. If I started speaking in Chinese, it would still be, you could still hear me, but maybe you couldn't understand me. So all of these different things work together for modality. And when you think about our cell phones, the phone itself is a huge example of multimodality. So on Twitter, you can tweet, you can post videos, you can post pictures, you can hyperlink to other things. So most of our lives are multimodal. But if we go back to the former slide, we can also see that this has always been a part of our society. So even the ancient Egyptians, with their hieroglyphics and their pictures, were engaging in multimodality. So there's an author and researcher that I respect. His name is Frank Serafini. And he says that multimodality is the study of the obvious, because we are always and ever engaged in multimodal practices, which leads us to our first slide. So James Paul G is a theorist, and he talks about language and modality or multimodality. And G suggests that language has never been unimodal. So if we think about like university, uni means one in the English language and in the prefix. It's always and ever been multimodal. So multi, of course, suggests many. So language has never been just a unimodal experience. It's been a multimodal experience, all right? And words can be related to images or to actions or to experiences that give them meaning. So even though language is multimodal, oftentimes in the context of schooling, we are focused primarily on text, on print, on books. And books are great, but they can only do certain things. A book can't talk to me. Whereas if I have an audio book and it has the author pre-recorded, I can play an audio book and have the book read to me. If I read an audiobook, maybe there's a hyperlink inside the text, and I can click on the hyperlink and it gives me the definition for a word. So different types of modes have different positive things and different negative things. And so one of the affordances, one of the good things about an ebook is that I can have a lot of different functions that I might not have with the traditional textbook in schools. So as we think about supporting our students, we can know that their lives are already multimodal, and that the things that we do with them to support their teaching and learning should draw on all of the literacies that they have through internet and through cell phone and through tablet and through computer. So now I want to give an example of how language is itself multimodal. All right, and we're going to begin with the word intensity. So let's say that you're teaching your students about this vocabulary word, right? And this word intensity can have different meanings in different contexts. So if we are helping our students to understand the vocabulary word, we can also help them to understand how this word takes on different meanings in different contexts. So for example, if we're talking about color, if something is very intense in color, maybe it has high saturation. So I think about like a highlighter, right? The green here is quite intense. This green is very bright and very dynamic. It's a much different green than the green that's inside my shirt or the green that is on the grass outside. So if we think about intensity and we're talking about color, then we can think about how saturated the image is. If we're talking about light, we can think about brightness. So let's say you wake up in the morning and the sun is very bright and intense. Or you're on your moped driving to get lunch and the noon sun is so intense, it's so bright, right? Maybe there's a flash, right? And the intensity of the flash makes the light so bright. So even here, we're talking about intensity, it's the same word, but it has different understanding when we relate it to color versus relate it to light. If we want to bring in a different mode, we can think about speech. So if someone's speech is intense, maybe they talk very strongly, very loudly, right? Or maybe they talk very forcefully, or they talk very like in an intense way. So it's not soft. Their tone is very loud and it's very dominant, right? So as opposed to this, if I talked like this, right now my speech is not very intense. My speech is a little sad, right? So we can sense the difference of intensity in the tone of speech, right? Gesture. If someone, bum, 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 that's a very intense gesture. It's very forceful. It's loud. It makes a noise. If we do a broad sweep of all of these things, right? These are very intense gestures. So when we think about gesture, it has a different meaning of intensity than light for brightness or speech for loudness or color for saturation. So when we work with students, we want to help them understand how does this word, to know this word, what does this word mean in different contexts? When we think about the intensity of layout, right? How is the images, how are they portrayed? So maybe think about you go to sing karaoke with your friends and you see the videos with the intensity of either the music with the lyrics, right? Or the way that they frame the video that you sing the karaoke song along to. Maybe the song feels very intense in the karaoke scene, or where you put something, it might be more intense. If I move the camera very much close into my face, right? It's a very intense view, right? So all of these things shape positioning and shape our understandings, right? So if we were working with students and we wanted them to understand a vocabulary word, we could have them create multimodal representations. So we could have them say, when you think of intensity, draw or show or talk about some different ways that intensity is understood in different contexts, right? So language itself is multimodal. I'm going to give another example. Okay, so we think about social semiotics as signs and symbols, right? So multimodal ensembles, an ensemble is just a way of bringing together all of the different resources, right? They use different signs and symbols to represent or to communicate meaning. So I'm using a PowerPoint tonight, and I'm using different signs and symbols to reinforce the things that I'm saying to you out loud, right? So I am giving you a multimodal presentation tonight. It's on Zoom. It has a PowerPoint. It has audio and video. All right. So when we think about semiotic resources, resources are signs and symbols, and it's the tools that people have for representing and for communicating meaning, right? So different things will mean different understandings in certain contexts, right? So if you go to Italy and you're in Italy and you're driving on the streets of Italy, and let's say you're in a car and your car goes quickly in front of someone else's car, and the person goes like this, and they give you the look and they shake their fingers. The shaking of the fingers is a gesture that communicates they're like upset with you, like, why did you do that, right? In the US, if you use the middle finger, it's a very offensive gesture, right? When I traveled to India, when people in India want to confirm something, rather than shaking their head yes like this, they nod their head like this. And so when I was in India, I would ask a question and they would shake their head. And because I'm used to this being yes and this being no, I took this head nod as negative, even though it was meant to be positive. So different signs hold different meanings, right? For some people, maybe a star is just something out in the planets. But if you are Jewish, then the star might have a different meaning, right? Or a cross or a crescent, right? So each of these things take on different meaning at different times and in different ways, right? And so when we think about these ways for our students, visual images and texts and design elements, they all work on their own and they all work together to represent meaning and to share information, right? So audio, visual, design elements, even the way that this slide is built, right? This slide has 3 parts and it has a title, right? So the title gives us some information and then the different parts come in as I click the slides. So all of these things are working together to share information with you, all right? And so if we think about emojis, I've already talked about this, but emojis are one of the best representations of signs and symbols, right? So we can give the thumbs up sign, and there's the thumbs up emoji, there's the high five emoji, there's the crying emoji, there's the balloon emoji. So all of these emojis are signs and symbols that can be used to represent understanding or to represent meaning. So here are some examples of different semiotics that take on different meaning in different contexts. So on the left-hand side, we have the North Face. It is a North American outdoor clothing company. They sell tents and backpacks and hiking shoes and hats and jackets. In the middle is a famous rock formation in a national park. It's called Yosemite. And the name of this is Half Dome. And on the right-hand side, we have a thumbs up. But if we think about these in different contexts, they take on different meaning. So the far right image with a thumbs up is not just a thumbs up. In the Facebook era, this is become the like symbol, right? So this thumbs up can mean agreement, or it could mean, like in America, if you put your thumb up and you walk down the street, then it means you want a car to pick you up and take you somewhere, right? We call it hitchhiking. So if you walk down the road and you see someone with their thumb up, they're trying to get a ride with you, right? So in this context, the thumb up can mean a lot of different things, but when we apply it to Facebook, the semiotic, the sign of the thumbs up, takes on a new meaning. It means I liked your post or I liked your picture, right? The center image is a picture of Half Dome. But if you look on the right-hand side, or on the left-hand side, the North Face, this white structure is supposed to be the Half Dome. So what they've done is they have taken these 3 arches, the 3 white arches for the North Face, to represent the Half Dome, because they want to show that their company provides, the kind of equipment and gear that you could use to go like hiking in a national park or go adventuring out in nature. So each of these are different signs and symbols that take on different meanings in different contexts. These would all be examples of semiotics that are bounded by social meaning. How does social media impact the thumbs up sign? How does the 3 arches of the white for the North Face represent the middle mountain, the Half Dome? And what does it suggest, right? So when people see the North Face, they want to think about gorgeous outdoor adventure. And the symbol of the mountain is used for purposes of marketing. They want to sell their products and they want people to be drawn to their products. So they draw on this sign, this semiotic, to sell their materials. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to show how language, again, this is like intensity, is multimodal. And language can take on its own form of meaning. So let's say it is the morning now in Indonesia, and you are drinking coffee. And you say to someone, uh-oh, the coffee spilled. And you say to them, go get a broom. Or if the coffee spilled and you say to them, go get a mop. Or if I am in the store and I say, oh, the coffee spilled, go stack it. So we are talking about a singular thing, coffee, that can exist in different states or different forms. So if we want to get a broom, maybe we spilled the grounds of coffee, the ground up coffee, right? Or the coffee beans, right? If we need a mop will get liquid. So maybe the coffee has already been brewed. So now the coffee is in liquid form and we need a mop to get up the coffee because it's a liquid. Finally, if the coffee has spilled and we want to stack it, it means that the coffee is in packaged form, or it's in boxes, or it's in cans, right? So even though we're talking about the very same thing, coffee, in a packaged form versus a liquid form versus a bean form, if we spill it, we need different tools to help us clean up our mess. So this is a way that language is always and ever multimodal, because the meaning must be made by the form. So the semiotic forms here, as I noted, are the coffee grounds, the coffee as a liquid, or the coffee in a package, right? So the meaning is inhibited or understood according to the form of the response. All right. So now I want to show you one student. This is a student that I taught last spring, and she was a student in my class where we were looking at the role of language and how a person's language, or the languages that they speak, are a reflection of their identities. And this is a multimodal composition. So what I want you to do, if you feel comfortable, is maybe if you could put in the chat, if you want, if you feel free, you can add what are some of the different modes that you see here. What are some of the different modes that are a part of this multimodal composition, right? So you can put in the text, in the chat, maybe some things that you're seeing. Does anyone want to give some thoughts of some ideas of things that you see? Okay, so thank you, Dion. Notes, we see on one side it's very pale, and the other side it's very colorful. So there are two parts to the composition, right? We have one that is in black and white, and the other that is in bright dynamic colors. What else do we see in this composition? We see two different languages. In the bright dynamic language, we see we see a city and a village. We see letters and pictures. We see different identities, right? So if you look at the student in the orange thought cloud, she has her name. And this student comes from a Hispanic background. And in Hispanic culture, part of their social semiotic is that they have their father and their mother's last name. But if you look on the left-hand side, it says, what's your name? And there's a space for the last name and a space for the first name, but there's not enough space for her to put all of her family's names. So we can see that she is between two worlds. She has two identities, who she is in her home country and maybe who she is in the country that she is immigrating to. And if you look at the speech bubble here coming out of her mouth in the black and white, it says, I don't know. right? So she's being asked, what's your name? And she doesn't know how to express her name in a different cultural context. Because in her own culture, you have the father and the mother's last names are both part of your last name. But in the US system, you should only use your father's last name, not your mother's name, right? So my girls, when they grow up, they will not keep my name. They will take their husband's name, right? And so they will have one last name, not two last names. Okay. What else do we notice in her composition? We do see the difference between the city and the village. So maybe as she moves, she's leaving a local context to go into a very dynamic big city context. There's lots of buildings in front of her, so maybe she's going from a more rural environment to a more urban environment. We do see that the one building is full of color and the other buildings are not, and that there's different perspective, right? We can also see the direction that she is facing, right? So it looks like she's leaving one space behind and stepping into a new space, right? And maybe in leaving the right-hand side behind, she's giving up her bright culture, her bright heritage, her bright family practices, the vibrancy to go to a new place. To her, maybe this new place is not yet colorful because she has yet to make meaning there, right? So maybe after a month or 3 months or 5 months, the image on the left will become very bright and dynamic. But right now, she's going from her Spanish heritage to maybe a North American, maybe Canada or US city or something like this. And her heritage is split in half, right? Who she was and who she's going to become, right? So if we think about this composition, it's quite complex. Even if we go back to the ideas that you shared, we have things like differences in the buildings, traditional and modern, color, different perspectives, Spanish heritage, city versus village, the identities that this young woman has, the two languages that she speaks. So we have a very, very, very complex expression of form with only very few words. In fact, the only words on here are what's your name, last, first, I don't know, and then her name in Spanish, which is Ana de la Plaza Perez Garcia, right? So if we think about that, there are less than 15 words on this composition. Yet this picture tells us so much, right? So if we think about the ways that modes can communicate, if this student was to write these ideas about identity, she might just say something like, in the US, I'm not sure what I should call myself because I have my family names and we don't use family names in the US, right? I don't know what to call myself. But that is so much less powerful than this image because the student is able to communicate through signs, through symbols, through color, through positioning, through the two sides, so much more meaning. So when we think about the role of multimodal composition or multimodality in language, we can think about all of the different ways that modes can help us to communicate and express meaning. So this image is very simple in terms of the language. The actual English words are not that many. There's not even 10 different English words on here. But yet the expression and the term that she communicates in this composition is quite powerful. So when we think about our students, how can they express themselves? What are their identities? How are their cultures? How are their backgrounds shaping who they are as students that we teach? And how do we draw upon that background and that knowledge and that experience to bring expertise and to bring shared learning into our classroom spaces? Okay, so now I'm just going to pause here and let you read this. I'll take a break. I've been talking for quite a bit, and then we'll discuss this idea together. being literate requires one to be able to use the various modes of representation to make sense of the world and convey meaning in particular social contexts for particular social purposes. So if we go back to the previous slide, we can see that this image is using different modes for different means of communication. There are particular social contexts and particular social purposes. So the social contexts are the village and the city. They're the young woman leaving one place and heading to another place. And there are the social contexts, the names that she has in her Spanish heritage, and then how those same names she doesn't know how to identify in a North American context because her family names don't fit into the brackets that they have in the US context. So this student is demonstrating through multimodality their understanding of making sense of the world for this young woman, and they're using this representation for particular social contexts and particular social purposes. Okay, so I have some images here, and I want you to look at these images and then put in the chat, what do these different images, what modes are they representing? There's a couple of different pictures. What modes are they representing? What are you noticing? What could this relate to? Okay, so one student has noted that this is quite complicated or quite complex. Students are saying that they're seeing architecture. What else are we seeing? We're noticing the color, the many different shapes. So if we think about the shapes here, we have mostly triangles. But then when these triangles are repeated over and over again, they form into diamonds. And when the diamonds are repeated over and over, they form into kind of these polygons. So if we look at the side of the building, we can see that all of these little triangles have made up other complex shapes, right? The parts become the whole. We can also see that this is, okay, someone says they see the formula in the symbols. So if we go to the upper left-hand corner, we can see that there's a mathematical theorem for geometry. Oops. Sorry. Wait, I have to go back. Sorry. Okay. Okay. So we see here the formula, and the formula could be used to make this building, right? So maybe you study geometry and you have to solve for the area of a triangle to show that they're congruent. Or you have to understand trigonometry, right? So triangles are part of mathematical knowledge, and mathematical knowledge is often used for architecture, right? And then if you look over here, this chart, it's quite small, but it has different things like angle, right? So it has acute angle, it has obtuse angle, it has right angle, it has degrees, it has ray, it has plane, right? So if we think about all of these things together, these are different modes of mathematics that lead to different outcomes. So without mathematics, this architectural building could not stand. But because of the theory of mathematics and the proof and what we know about different angles and different structures, it leads to support. So this is another example of a multimodal composition where a discipline, mathematics, has different meanings across mode that support some sort of outcome. And here the outcome is using multimodality around math and trigonometry and triangles in the role of architecture. And they've built a building that is not only beautiful, but can also stand up. So we see, yes, thank you. Galang, thank you very much. Triangle in theory and triangle in application. This is exactly it. It's here's the theoretical and then here's the practical. So when we think about multimodality and working with our students, we can show them how different modes lead to different supports and different supports lead to different outcomes. Okay, so now we're going to talk briefly about visual literacy. And the idea of visual literacy is here on the slide. So again, I will give you a moment to read it so you don't have to hear my voice all the time. So when we think about visual literacy, we need to think about how the design features impact what we produce or what we design, and also how we make sense of that. So if you're on social media, right, you already know that social media works in different ways around visual literacy. So when we read a book, we read, left to right and we flip the pages. But when we engage in most online spaces, we scroll from top to bottom. If you go onto Instagram or Twitter, you can scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll. It never stops, right? It's endless scrolling. But you also know on social media, like, where's the main part? Is it the image? Is it the text? And then under it, there are little features. So is it like? Is it retweet? Is it comment, right? So each of these design features help us to know how to interact with the text, right? There's a design template. The person's head for their image is in the circle, right, on the top part. So it's the person and then the text image behind it, right? And then it's a grid. So if you're on Instagram, it's a 9x9 grid. It's all these boxes and squares. Your most recent post is on the top. Your oldest post, you must scroll all the way down, right? And as you add new posts, all of the former posts move to different positions, right? So all of this is a part of visual literacy. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, they all employ designers who work with visual literacy. So now I'm going to show you an image, and I'm going to see if you do what says will happen. So visual literacy, right? And again, here we can kind of see this somewhat suggests the idea of like an eyeball, maybe like someone's eye, right? Where we see the different parts of the blueness. Maybe it makes you think of a machine, but we can see how all of these different parts are leading into a whole. And I put here a link. So the Toledo Art Museum has a web page, and this web page allows you to interact with different forms of visual media. And I'm going to just really quickly show you from their web page. The notion of what they would say would be seeing art. So just let me switch into the other room. Okay. So I'll start sharing my screen. So if we see in the thing, there's the notion of visual literacy. And so visual literacy is important for people in every field. And it's like, what is visual literacy? What is visual language? But I'm just going to scroll, right? So even this web page is multimodal, right? So we can kind of see they have these questions here. They have a box here with some information. And then they talk about seeing art. So different ways to see art. We can look, we can interpret, we can observe, we can analyze, we can see, we can describe. And then here's all these infographics, right? So observe, see, interpret, analyze, describe, and look have their own little emoji, right, if you will. And there's visual layout. So we can read from left to right, or we can read look, describe, observe, analyze, see, interpret. We can choose to read across, or we can read up and down, right? Then think about it. What about color? What about lines? What about shapes? What about space and texture? All of these are art elements that go into what we produce and how we make sense and meaning of the world, right? Is there balance? Is something emphasized? Is there harmony? Is there movement? Are things done in proportion? Is there rhythm? Is there a sense of unity, or is it variety? So these are all different design principles that we see in videos and social media, and we can help our students to understand how the visual media impacts the message. So if you think about the student that we just saw, the young woman, right? That had a sense of balance, right? Her design principle. There was the woman in the middle, her village on one side, and the city on the other side, right? And she used color. One side had color, the other side was in black and white, right? The way that her face was pointed suggested movement in that direction, right? So these are different design elements that we saw in the student's multimodal composition to express a sense of her transition between leaving one culture and leaving one identity and leaving one language, Spanish, and going to a new culture and a new city and a new language, right? And then we can analyze the form and the symbols and the ideas and the meaning. So collectively, each of these things have, here we can see some of these design principles, right? We can see some of the form and the symbols. Here on a food scene, we can see the use of light and the use of dark and the use of food and the use of flowers and the use of other background elements, right? In this picture, we have the balance, we have the column and the one view and the two view. So for our students, because the world is increasingly visual, we want them to be able to understand how are these design elements used, and then we could even talk about it. So maybe you show your students a picture and you say to them, what do you see here? What do you think? What do you wonder? Tell me a story about this picture, right? So you can use multimodal compositions as a springboard for discussion in your classes as you interact and talk with your students, right? So I'm going to show you another example of this on the PowerPoint, because it shows us how our eyes and how we've been conditioned and trained to read things visually. So this image is an example of design principles. It says you will read this first. And the reason you will often read that first is because it's in the center and our eyes are trained to go to the center, right? Also, it's in white with a black font. So our eyes go to the white and the box, they go right in there. Then we are often trained to read top to bottom. So then we read what's under it. It's outside the box, but it's smaller. And then there's one smaller under that. And then when we get to the bottom, we're like, wait, there's something back at the top. I need to go back and look at the top again, right? So this is an example of how different design features help us to read and notice things, right? So as we're trained for literacy and for multimodality and digital literacy, the way that the graphic design works, it informs the way that we read and engage with this text, right? So we can draw our own students' attention to the features that they might notice, right? So for example, the human eye sees the color red the fastest. So often in advertisements, you'll see red because our eyes are drawn to the attention of red, right? So all of these things are working together to communicate the different meaning. Okay, so now I'm going to spend the next maybe half hour talking about different methods and approaches and activities that you can use in a language classroom to support multimodality. And we'll revisit some of these later if you're going to do some planning, but I'll just introduce, these are some different topics that you can use. So Photovoice, language portraits, visual metaphor, object-based discussion, community mapping, remix and hacking, and critical media literacy. So these are all multimodal approaches that can be used in the English language teaching classroom. Okay, so Photovoice is a participatory method, and it was created by Wong and Burris in 1997 as a process for people to identify, represent, and enhance their community through a photographic way of sharing. It uses images as a tool to share about problems and pose meaningful questions in the community to find actionable solutions. So with Photovoice, you might challenge your students. Please go out into the local community and take a picture of an image that you think is something that is an issue or problem or something that our community needs to be aware of, and to raise this awareness for the community. And you can ask them then to write a reflection. What is your picture? What does it represent, and what does it depict? What is the image that you're trying to convey, and what does it say about something you want to draw our attention to? So I'm going to show you an example of youth engaging in Photovoice. So I'm going to share the screen. Give me a second. I need to, again, I have a Mac, and so my computer has many different desktops, and I need to get to the right one, which is also like a multimodal problem. So I'm going to share it with you. So this is an example of youth who wanted to address issues within their community. Look beyond the fence. About water access, water reserves. The role of a car in supporting their work. Some students enjoyed swimming in the local lake, and they wanted to keep the lake clean from pollution. Member that was in poor condition, and they wanted to rebuild it. They wanted to make sure that the housing in their community was strong. They want to help people have better housing conditions. This is an old water tower that was getting demolished, or needed to be demolished, right? So you can get the idea. So Photovoice is a way for your students to go out in the community and take a picture, and then they can write about how this is a reflection of the local community and what they want to say. So we saw, people at the lake saying, let's combat pollution. We saw some people saying, oh, the condition of the housing in this community is not very good. Let's give resources to support better housing, access to clean water. So Photovoice is a way to blend image with a written expression to support students to raise awareness for issues in their local community. Okay. The next one that I'm going to share with you is the language portrait. And this is something that we can do to have students reflect upon their language practices and their language identities. So Lau is a researcher who was working in the Canadian context and was working with bilingual students, many of whom were from like a French background, because France has two official languages, English and French. And so they asked students to draw compositions that would reflect who they were as language learners, or who were their linguistic identities, right? So you can see these are some of the different images that students came up with. And I will share one example with you in a little bit of a greater detail. So in this image, the student shares about how her different identities between from Scotland and from Portugal make up who she is as a person, and the languages and the cultures that she knows and that she speaks. And this is a self-representation of her multiple identities. So her hair is blue because it reminds her of the ocean near her family's cottage in Scotland. Her heart is red and green, which are the colors of the Portuguese flag. She considers herself to have Scottish and Portuguese heritage. And then later she goes on and talks about why she chose to put the rainbow at her feet, right? But this is the work that a young student did to communicate how their cultural practices and their linguistic practices are a part of their identities. So this is work that you could do with your own students in your classroom, or you could create your own language portrait and share it with your students and then have them talk about it. So here we have a multimodal composition that draws on the visual and also the written with these texts together. Okay, another thing that you can do with students is this idea of visual metaphor. So you can have students create ideas for different concepts. So if you think about this visual metaphor, the student is seeking to address transportation, right? So on the one hand, we have a view of the subway map, I believe of Tokyo, and we can see all of the different subway lines and the interchanges for the Tokyo subway network, which is underground. And then on the right-hand side, we can see the shipping containers. And we can see how these shipping containers are in 4 different colors, but they're stacked up on one another, right? So this is a way for a student to express their meaning, maybe about how their languages travel, right? So they want to talk about, when I was younger, on the right-hand side, I spoke English and I studied French, right? They were very segmented. They were very compartmentalized. I had English at home and French at school, right? But then maybe they say later, when I became an adult, I started traveling the world. And in fact, I went to all these different countries. And so even though before my language was very separated, like shipping containers, now I see my language as very integrated, much like the subway system, right? So you can ask students to create a metaphor to talk about something, right? And so this student was maybe thinking about the way that language can be represented by transportation, right? And if you think about the image on the right-hand side, the shipping containers need a vessel. You must put the containers on a boat to get the containers to move, right? The containers on themselves do not move. But if you think about the image on the left, we can move freely in the subway system. I can walk onto a subway car and go from one point in the city to another point in the city. So even though both need a vessel, either the boat or the transportation, the train, there's much more fluidity for the transportation network that is the subway than the shipping containers. The shipping containers are fixed, they're more flat and heavy, whereas the subway system is more dynamic. So you can ask your students, come up with a metaphor to represent an idea, right? So maybe they come up with the idea of a tree, and a tree has many branches, but a tree has many roots, right? So their metaphor is for something that needs strong roots to grow branches, right? So you can ask your students to engage in visual metaphor using pictures and then explain their meaning to you orally or explain their meaning to you in writing. Okay, there's also object-based instruction. And so we're gonna now spend some time with this image in the chat. So what I would like you to do is I would like you to look upon this image, and I'd like you to tell me what are some things that you notice about this object. So please put in the chat. Okay, someone says it's ancient. It looks old, perhaps. Someone is saying a leg, right? So they're wondering, is this like someone's leg in some sort of thing? Someone wonders if this is a cast in a leg, right? So what makes you think that it might be a cast? Okay, someone else is saying a mummy or a part of a mummy, right? What makes us think that this could be a mummy or a bandage? Okay, this is really good discussion in the chat, right? It's an artifact, maybe it's cursed, it definitely appears old to you. So all of these things are helping us to make sense of the object, right? And many people are saying that this is a mummy, right? So here we are using vocabulary, spoken discussion around an object, right? And we're trying to make sense of it, and we're making meaning together. We're trying to negotiate what could this mean, right? So I'm saying back to you the things that you're saying to me. Some people think it's a leg or a cast or a mummy. They think it's old. They think it looks cursed. They think that it looks like a bandage. They think that it could be part of someone's leg. It looks ancient, right? It's been preserved. These are all really great words. And so as we collectively work to make meaning, we can guess at what it is, right? Someone says it looks like a hockey stick in a bandage, right? So I'm going to tell you what this really is. So this is a cat mummy. It's a mummified cat. So if I had said to you Egypt, right, that would have unlocked some meaning, but you guys were already making meaning, right? You were already suggesting that it was a mummy, in large part because it looked old or it looked ancient, because you saw bandages, because it had a certain form. So all of these together is how we collectively made meaning. So here, this was a multimodal discussion. We had an object, and then we had the chat feature, and you guys were able to share your ideas, and we negotiated for understanding around what could this art object be. All right. Another thing that you can do is engage in community mapping. Now, I am from the United States, and so this is a picture of the geographical boundaries of my country, right? And we generally see some colors in this map. So as you look at this map, what are some things that you're noticing? Put those in the chat. What do you notice about this map? Yes, some part has brighter color. The east is more dense in color. Color saturation. The violet gradation, it's very colorful. Okay, so I'm gonna stop you for just a second. Someone just said population density, right? So this is actually true. This is a map that reflects a certain thing. I'm not going to say what it is yet, but the reason that the color is more intense is because there is more population of people that live in the US East than that live in the US West, right? Most of the middle of America is not very densely populated, right? And if you think about the founding of this country, right? We started, the colonizers came to the East Coast first, and then they moved westward, right? So it does make sense that from a historical perspective, the population density will be deeper in the East because it's been around longer than the parts of the West, right? These are the states. They're also broken down into counties. What else do we notice about this picture? Feel free to put more ideas in the chat. Okay, maybe we see some roads, traffic routes. We notice that the middle has less population. All right, so I'm gonna just put one more thing in the chat, and I want you to think then again. Okay, so someone says they're seeing boxes. So each of these boxes represents a different county. In the United States, we have 50 states, and then within each state, we have different counties. So if you can look here at the west, if you know where California is, right? The state next to California is Nevada, and you can see there's large boxes because Nevada only has like maybe 20 different counties, right? So the county is the local government. Right? So this is a map of the US, and we get to see every county, and this is from the 2020 election. And if you study politics, what you can know next is that red So this is a data, we call this a data visualization of the 2020 presidential election. So then you can notice in certain places, there's a lot of blue, but in many places, there's a lot of red, but overall it reads more purple, right? So even though people will tell you that America is a very divided nation, you can actually see with all the purple gradation that there's a fluidity of people who voted for Trump in some places and people who voted for Biden in other places, right? It's not all red or blue, right? So this is a very accurate representation of the different ways that people voted in the 2020 presidential election, right? So we can use this to support students' meaning making. You can show them a map, or you can show them an image and engage them in discussion. What do we see here? What could this represent? What do the colors mean? What do the shapes mean? What do the boxes mean? And you can have a very meaningful dialogue. If you think about even for our own conversation, we have all of these turns of exchange as you guys are all putting different ideas in the chat box of the different things that you would like to talk about. All right, so I'm going to show you another example of community mapping, right? So one of the things that I have my students do is go into the local community. And this is a picture of Miami. And there is a very famous restaurant called the Versailles restaurant. and it is known for Cuban heritage, right? So if you think about where I'm from in Miami, Miami is very close to Cuba. It's only 90 miles away, not very many kilometers away. And many people left Cuba to come to the United States as immigrants, right? And so when people come to a new country as immigrants, they bring their cultures and they bring their languages and they bring their practices. So one of the things I have my students do is go out into the local community. And I say to them, I want you to visit a local shop. And I want you to notice all of the cultural and the linguistic variation in those spots, right? And then take some pictures, right? So when the students go out, they take a picture. If you can look in the bottom right-hand corner is a picture of the restaurant. So if you go to this restaurant, you can see it on the map. It's called Versailles Cuban Bakery. And if you click on that, it's a geotag. So it will take you to the spot in the map, in a real map, where this restaurant is. And then if you look at this upper picture, it's an example of the food that they serve at the Cuban bakery, which is well known for its sweet and decadent desserts, right? So we can have students take pictures of a place that they visit in the local community and reflect about what is this place in the local community? What's its role? What does it do? And then all the students, we can gather all together where they went, and then we can use like Google Earth or use some sort of map feature and drop pins and say, we had 30 students in this class, and students went to 20 different cultural locations in Miami. And let's look at what cultures are represented, what languages are represented, what products are represented. So community mapping is a way that we can make sense of large scale data. So this is from like tons of all the votes in the US. So it's very, very broad at the national level. And then we can also go to the more local level and we can engage with the community and we can map the local places. And again, all of these are multimodal because there's text, there's picture, there's geotagging, there's written reflection, there's making sense of maps and data, and all of these things together support students to talk about their experiences and to engage in different practices. They're not just in the classroom, they're outside the classroom for homework, doing this work, and then come back to the classroom and report in English or the language that you're teaching the things that they learned. Okay, oops, sorry. And then the next one is remixing or hacking. So you can have students take an image and remake the image, right? So if we look at this image here, it says, what a glorious feeling, I'm happy again, right? This is an image of a waterfall in the background, but the student wanted to put a very famous movie. In the US, there's a movie called Singing in the Rain, right? And so the student here is remixing the image, right? Normally we think of rain as a sad thing, but this person is saying, actually, when I go out into the rain, it makes me feel happy, right? So they're mashing up, they're bringing together. What we have here behind it is a photo of a waterfall. And then we have the student singing in the rain, right? In the bottom image, we have a DJ, a disc jockey, and he is maybe remixing some songs together, right? So maybe there's a famous Indonesian tune, and students use the tune, and then they create their own chant in English to the tune that everyone will know, or they create a chant, or they use some sort of sound mixing. Maybe they use their phone and they record their own message, or they make their own music and share that with the class. And then this last one is a children's storybook. And the original title was The Birthday Bunny, but they changed it to Battle Bunny, right? And so the book is normally about a rabbit celebrating his birthday, but instead the author makes it about the rabbit going to a battle, like going to a war, right? And the reason that they did that is they wanted to draw attention to to gun violence, right? Because in the U.S. context, gun violence is a very bad thing, right? So they took what was normally a very happy thing, a birthday party, and they use it to critique violence in the U.S. context, right? So even though this is a children's story, they made this for adults, right? And the adult should look at this this story that has been hacked. And when we encourage students to engage in hacking, they're trying to address issues of marginalization. And in the US, that's often children and innocents, right? Because America often has a gun problem. And so they wanted to bring awareness to the gun problem. So this is some examples of remix and hacking, right? And then the very last one, excuse me, I have to grab my charger. My computer needs to get plugged in. The last example that I want to share for multimodal approaches is this need for critical media literacy. So as I was sharing with some students last night, we know that there is a lot of disinformation and a lot of misinformation. And so last year, one of our representatives, one of our congressmen, a senator, was said to have tweeted this. And so if you're active on Twitter, the blue check mark here is a symbol that means that it's a verified user. And verified users are often like important people in the society, right? So I have Twitter, but I'm not a verified user. I don't have a blue check mark because I'm just a professor. But like famous people or well-known people get the check mark. So this person says, I'll believe in climate change when Texas freezes over. And last year, Texas had snow, had very bad snow. And so this person is like, wow, this senator who denied climate change now has to address climate change. And this image got 19,000 retweets, and it got 103,000 likes. But this, in fact, was not a real tweet. It was fake. It was not real. So then he says, oh, I guess it's not. But if you look about it, by the time he goes to correct his message, this is actually false. This is like a lie. It's not even true. It only gets 50 retweets and only gets 386 likes. So it's much easier for lies and much easier for disinformation and much easier for untruth to travel, almost 20,000 retweets. But then when he goes to correct his error, when he says, I made a mistake, when he says that was not a real tweet, it only gets a small fraction, right? So bad news can travel. But when we want to correct it with good news, the good news does not travel as much. So we need to help students know the difference between, is this fact? Is this opinion? Who's tweeting this? What does the tweet represent? Can we believe the tweet? Is it good? Is it critical? Or is it not, right? All right. So this is the end of my conversation. Tonight we'll have some time for question and answer. But I think I want you to consider what were some things that you learned from the presentation? What was new to you? Maybe some of the things I talked about built on things that you already knew. And then the next question is, how might you try these ideas in your future teaching, right? How might you use some of the ideas to support your own students to develop multimodality? And then what questions do you have? So I thank you for listening to my talk. And now I look forward to answering your questions and concerns.
Okay, thank you very much, Matthew. Now, next, I'm going to invite students to give questions or maybe comments or opinions about the contents of the presentation. You may raise your hand and then unmute your microphone and ask the questions, or you may write down your questions in the text box. Yes, please. We still have time, about 30 minutes. This is from Muhammad Hasbullah Isnaini. He is the faculty member, Dr. Hasbullah, and he said that multimodality is essential for developing critical thinking. This is for presentation, for the administration requirements.
Right.
Students should fill the forms.
Yes. So to the question, I very much agree that multimodality is essential for developing critical thinking, and I think we need to help our students to ask questions, right? So last night when I presented, I was thinking about for Zoom, if you put your hands out, you can kind of see what does the camera capture, right? So when we think about, like, there's a new news broadcast, if you only get this image, you don't get what's over here and you don't get what's over there, right? So you only get one perspective, right? So if we think about multimodality, how is what we're learning being framed by the people who are controlling either the message or the camera or the perspective, right? So all of these things for multimodality matter, because let's say I have some books down here, but I don't want you to see them, right? So I don't put them in the frame, right? And then my background looks very nice, but you don't see that I have like a messy room, right? So when we think about multimodality and critical thinking, what can we see? What can we not see? Whose images are present? Whose images are missing? Whose voices are there? Whose voices are not there? And multimodality can help us think about these things.
Okay, please, students. I think between America and Indonesia have some similarities about the number of ethnic groups, and we are also living in a multicultural society. But in Indonesia, we have thousands of languages, of local languages. So everybody has sometimes more than one or two languages in everyday conversation. So I will be easily switch my language from Japanese into Indonesian into English. And this is the questions or language, or recommend the use of target language?
Yeah. So I do think, right now, and to the point, right, the field, and I'll talk more about this later, is focusing on translanguaging, right? And translanguaging is concerned with the fluidity of language practices and how language flows among and between. And a large part of this theory is this notion of repertoire, right? So each person has a linguistic repertoire, with many different features, right? So in the Indonesian context, Bahasa Indonesian is the official language, but there's all these regional dialects and different views of language. So if we think about, if we want students to develop, then they can use their native language as a support or scaffold for their entire repertoire. So they can make meaning across their home language, the official language of the state or school, and then the target language, which is English. So I think it's okay because language itself is multimodal. So if they're fluidly understanding, like going back to intensity, right? I started the lesson with intensity. So maybe they know intensity in English, and then there's a version of intensity in Bahasa Indonesian, and then there's the home language as well. So they can move within and across these ideas, and all of that is supporting their language learning. It doesn't just have to be in the first language. It can be across these languages.
Okay, thank you. Again, I invite students to give your comments or questions, please. Students. They also study ICT in ELT subject. And in this subject, I and Ibu Dr. Anya asked them to develop a learning design or activity that is multimodality text. So they have to make a lesson plan that based on multimodality text. So the lesson plan should include all modes of learning, pictures, posters maybe, and then text and audio and visual, and also other activities like games or application based, like using mobile phone for learning.
Mm.
Angga
I see
and
that
Fikri.
2 students have raised the hand.
All right, yes, please. Angga or Fikri, you may ask questions. Angga, please, yes.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Good morning, everyone, and good evening to Mr. Deroo. My name is Pulubudianga, and the question related to the multimodality that I want to ask is, it is stated that the factors such as color, light, space, gesture, and layout is important in multimodality or in teaching perhaps. And all of this related to the multimodality has their own usage. So what if students that are let's say disabled, they cannot see, or perhaps deaf or even mute, in a online learning process as such as this, can relate to these factors that are important in the teaching of using multimodality. And what if one of these factors is absent during the implementation of modality? Does it require all of them to be present, or it's okay if it is if one of them is absent from the presentation?
Yeah, so I think if one is missing, that is okay. I think as I said earlier, to restate that each mode has benefits and disadvantages, right? So one of the advantages of Zoom is that we can communicate across time zones. We can keep safe in the midst of a global pandemic for our health and well-being. But then one of the trade-offs is that maybe, normally when we talk to other people, we don't always have to look ourselves in the face every day. But on Zoom, your camera is always pointing back at you. So it's very awkward for some people to see themselves talk, because normally you don't get yourself, right? So Zoom has many affordances and it has some trade-offs. So for students that maybe are blind or visually impaired, the other modes support their composition and support their meaning making. Or if someone is hard of hearing or deaf or mute, the other modes also help with that meaning making. So when we think about multimodality, we can think about what are the different elements that are part of the composition. Sometimes a composition is visual and audio and textual. Sometimes it's just text and visual, no audio, right? And if you've ever watched movies, you can think about how the sound design influences the film. So sometimes there's nothing and it's silent, and maybe the movie is set in outer space, so it shows the choice of no sound makes it feel vast and open and empty, right? As opposed to a scene that's in a very crowded restaurant, right? There's people talking and you can hear the dishes clinking, right? So each of these different sound designs sets the mood for the viewer, right? And so you have either lots of sound or no sound, and that impacts the feeling of the composition, right? So if students have different abilities and are not able to draw on each of the modes, they can still mix and match different modes to support their composition. Thank you so much for your question.
Okay, next questions, maybe Fikri or Ricky.
Hello everyone. Hello Mr. Deroo. Hello Papa dan Ibu dosen. I would like to ask a question about what are the basic skills that people need to improve their multimodal skills. So if you want to teach students how to use multimodal and how to improve them, what are the basic things that they need to have before doing that? Thank you.
So I think I will answer that with this idea of a meta language, right? They need to know what these terms mean, right? So the idea of semiotic, that's very jargony, right? It's got a lot of jargon. It's a very technical term, right? We wouldn't really talk about semiotic like in everyday speech, right? It's not a common speech. But we do talk about signs and we do talk about symbols, right? So then if we can show them the way that the signs and the symbols combine to make meaning, then they can understand the idea behind a social semiotic, right? So think about the cat mummy. We looked at that mummy and people said that it was old and they said it was ancient and it looked like a bandage. Collectively, you were all engaged in multimodal meaning making. You were responding to a visual element and you were expressing it through, not through talking, but through texting, which is a form of communication, right? And I was reading your text out loud, right? And then collectively, we were trying to identify what could this be? And then I said, it's the cat mummy. Or when we were looking at the map of the United States, right? They were talking about intensity and people were talking about like, the spatial geography, right? So giving the students the language to talk about these things will help them to better understand it. So in my own presentation, to show that language is multimodal, I gave the coffee example, right? So we can see coffee is a solid, coffee is a liquid, coffee exists in different forms. So the more that students are new to these ideas, we want to even say like, what is multimodality? Or what is a sign and a symbol, right? And then once they can define these terms, maybe even in their L1, right? So what would you call the semiotic in your home language? What would you call multimodality in your home language? Then they can break apart the different parts to show how they combine to make meaning. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you. That answered my question.
So I say this to my students all the time. If something is tacit, we're aware of it, but we don't really think about it. So we need to take these things that we don't think about very often and make them explicit. We need to name them. We need to say, this is what's happening. Because normally if you sit down to watch a movie, you don't think about music and sound and dialogue and image and text. You're just seeing the film. But if you can take the film apart to the different discrete elements, you can see how all of the elements work together to draw for a cohesive whole.
Okay, thank you. Any other student, please? One student raise hand.
Please
Oh,
go ahead. Welcome you to ask your question.
Go ahead, Iqlil.
Ibu Dian first or Iqlil first?
No, I just welcome Iqlil to ask the questions, Pak Sugeng.
All right, okay, Iqlil, yes, please.
Okay, first of all, is my voice clear?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Let me introduce myself. My name is Muhammad Iqlil Zaki, and my question is, since multimodality seems like has a correlation with semiotic, which is interpretate meaning from sign, does it really be a problem? Because when there is a different interpretation when we interpret this in the sign, it will influence the understanding of the student, because our purpose on teaching is to deliver the same understanding or the same test.
Yes, we can still hear you.
Okay, because the purpose of teaching is to deliver the same understanding to the student. There's be a problem when the semiotic is the process of interpreting sign. Yeah, that's my question.
Great, that is a perfect question. And the answer is that the semiotic, because it's social, it's bounded by culture. So different cultures will read different signs in different ways. Even think about, like, for Chinese, right? I'm a Chinese speaker. So the character for mountain and the character for the word for mountain is different in Chinese and in Japanese. The character for mountain is the same. It's the same pictograph, but there's a different phoneme in Spanish, or sorry, in Chinese and in Japanese. So this is where the social semiotic comes in, because they both mean mountain, but they have a different signifier to get to the character for mountain. So we have to help students unpack the way that signs and symbols are culturally bounded. Okay, so I see two questions in the chat. I'm going to answer the first one. Someone says, I spend time on Twitter. What should I do to develop my critical thinking skills by using Twitter? So I think one of the first things you can do is this a real account? Twitter has so many bots, right? They're these little machines that, you know, drum up things. So you can see, do they follow real people, right? If they're not following real people, they're probably a bot. Do they follow people that you follow? Or do they follow people that you know of, right? This is another way to see, am I engaging with like a good account? And then as you read it, you can see, like, if it's from a news source, right? Who owns that news corporation, or who owns that information, right? And then what perspective, like, what point of view are they advancing, right? So for my country, it's very partisan right now. It's very polarized. It's partisan between Democrats and Republicans. So it's really hard to find the middle ground. So I know if something is coming from the right wing, then it's going to have a certain worldview. If something's coming from the left wing. So if you can ask these questions, who's tweeting this? What are their beliefs? Who are they affiliated to? These are all things that will help you to be more critical. And then I'm going to go to the second question that I see a student with her hand raised. So Arena says, I have a question. What challenges do you face as a teacher when you teach using the multimodal? Thank you. So I think the hardest thing about multimodality is awareness. We do it all the time, but we don't really think about it. So again, the hardest challenge for me is how to make it explicit. How can I get students to notice? How can I get them to name it, right? And how can I get them to inventory, right? So think about earlier, I showed the picture of geometry, right? And the example behind that was for architecture, right? And a student very smartly said, it's the theory and it's the application of the theory, right? So we need to help students make these things explicit. How do all of these things work together to support our understanding, right? And sometimes the best way to do that is to take away a mode. So let's say you are watching a horror film, right? If you cut out the sound, it's not as scary. Because often the sound in the horror film, like the monster, right? For Jaws, if you've seen the Jaws with the shark, right? Da-dun, 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 right? Ah, right? But if you take away all of that sound, then it's just like, but it's not scary, right? Okay, your question, please, with the hand raised.
Oh, all right. Can you hear my voice?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning to the lecturer and good afternoon for Matthew. Okay, I'm Nanitani Janitra, and I want to ask, but I wonder what are some practice for assessment in using of multimodality?
Yeah,
that's my question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we often on tests revert to true, false, multiple choice, right? So are students able to express their understandings using pictures or drawings? Like, are they able to express themselves using language beyond words, right? So the assessment, you could say to students, please draw a model, or please depict this in pictures. Or maybe you give them like 4 boxes and they put like a comic, right? They represent their knowledge in like comic book form, right? These are different ways to assess multimodal. Or maybe you're teaching them about like geometry, right? So please draw the different ways that triangles can be used to make other shapes, and communicate about the ways that triangles, rather than writing it out, they show you all the different ways that you can form a triangle. So if you want a multimodal response, then you need to have a multimodal question.
So we should be more flexible in use assessment, not only using true or false. That's
Yes.
what I got. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for answering my question.
Yeah. So, what you saw earlier was my student, when I asked them, I asked them for the image with the young girl, oops, this one, I asked them, I want you students, we're talking about how does language impact our identities, and how are our identities reflected to positions of what language has power in our society. So if you think about English, it's a powerful language because it's a world language, world's Englishes, right? So even though she's stepping into this culture where there's English and that's more power, she somewhat feels disempowered because they're taking away a part of her identity, right? So this student showed complex ideas without using a lot of words. And multimodal compositions can help us to express meaningful thinking and critical thinking without having to use a lot of text or a lot of words, but to use images to show powerfully these understandings.
Okay, now Indonesian time is 8:54 in the morning. Ibu head of study program, Dr. Ibu is also together with us. Do we still have time for Ibu and for Jeff? What do you think?
Yes, Bapak, actually we still have 5 more minutes, yeah, in Indonesia time. Okay, but maybe for the last, I would like to ask I will not ask a question, but maybe share with you, Matthew, regarding to the semiotic theory. Well, actually, we give our student knowledge about introduction to linguistics and some linguistics perspective in our curriculums. But maybe for the specific theory of semiotic, the study of sign and symbol, maybe they don't have that specific theory, but overall they know about the linguistic perspective regarding to that. In learning the semiotics, we know that we have the dyadic and also triadic. Yeah, you mentioned about the signifier and the signifiers when we have the abstract and concrete, or for the reality. Now, in teaching and learning, actually, for the student, some of our students actually maybe because yes, indeed, we need to think about the culture, of course, because we learn about the target language, our English as our in Indonesia, it is still in foreign language, but we learn it as our second language for teaching and learning. So intercultural communicative competence, yes, indeed, we need to have it in our teaching and learning or in our classroom. But sometimes, just like theory of linguistic relativity, sometimes we have imagined that this image, the interpretations of this image is A, but we have multi-interpretation regarding to that, because as Pak Sugeng told before, that in Indonesia we have multi-ethnics and multicultural. So sometimes we have a different perspective in seeing one sign or a symbolized sign, okay, or we have different interpretation toward the signifier, something like that. So how we overcome that? If I may say, it is just like a problem.
Right.
But
I mean, I try to say this to my students all the time. There's the difference between the ideal and the real. So tonight, I mostly presented theory to us and tried to show some practical implications. But there is this clash between the signs and the symbols, and between the signer and the signifier. So I think what we need is more like cross-cultural or like maybe they're intergenerational, interracial, interreligious dialogue. And I think we've got to talk across our understandings, right? Because I think I might not align with your sign and you might not align with my sign, but we can see why we ascribe meaning to these things. So I think that the dialogue is what matters the most, because ultimately, like, this is all about the negotiation for meaning, right? And we're going to negotiate in different ways. You might understand it this way, I might understand it that way, but we're having this productive conversation to like grapple with the meaning.
Yeah, meaning that if we have a social agreement, it will help us, okay, to have this perspective. Okay.
And sometimes you have to agree to disagree.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Pak Sugeng, Matthew.
So, is it all, Puja? Is it time for us to close, or maybe still one or two things you want to say?
I want to thank the students for their great questions, and thank the students for participating in the chat, and thank the students for listening to me talk. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Bapak Ibu dosen. Thank you, faculty members and students. And would you like to how to give applause in the Zoom meeting? So I think,
Okay.
all right,
Thank you.
okay, give applause, and thank you very much for the presentation. It's very meaningful and useful for us. Thank you, and see you next time.